Hey class, welcome back to another lesson on diagramming. Today we're going to be working on diagramming indirect objects. A couple days ago we worked on diagramming direct objects, so now we're looking at the next piece, the indirect object. So just as a matter of review, this is how we diagram direct objects in the sentence. You should be pretty familiar with how to diagram the subject and verb by now. And a couple days ago, we talked about the indirect object. So this is a little bit of review. We've got a horizontal line all the way across. Our subject comes first, and then we've got a vertical line that cuts through the horizontal line. Then we've got our verb. Then we've got a vertical line that stops at the horizontal line. And then we've got our direct object. All right, so next we want to talk about how to locate the indirect object. Before we can diagram it, we need to be able to find that in the sentence. Now, yesterday you learned about indirect objects and you did some practice with locating them in the sentence. So this is a little bit of review as well, but it's good to just walk through how we identify the indirect object in order to be able to locate it and then diagram it. So the first thing that we're always going to do is locate the simple verb. So finding the main one or two word verb of the sentence. So we locate the simple verb, and then after we do that, we locate the subject by asking who or what before the verb. Then we're going to identify the direct object by asking who or what after the verb. So if we had I ate, I might say I ate what, because hopefully I'm not eating whom. So asking who or what after the verb would be how we would locate the direct object. Now, if a sentence has a direct object, not every sentence does, but if it does have a direct object, it might have an indirect object. An indirect object is not required if you have a direct object, but it is sometimes there. So after locating the direct object, we could then look to see if we have an indirect object in the sentence. In order to do that, we'll put the subject, verb, direct object together and then ask one of these questions: to whom, for whom, to what, or for what after the direct object. So let's look at a sentence to see how that works. So we've got this sentence here. Tanya sent Fievel a letter. So the first thing we're going to look for is the verb. Most often the verb is an action word, but sometimes it might be another type of verb, like a being verb, am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been, one of those types of verbs. In this case, in this sentence, it is an action verb. So we can find the verb. Our action word is sent. So then we're going to ask the question, who sent or what sent? Well, the answer to that is pretty easy. Tanya sent. So Tanya is going to be our subject. Now, we're going to ask the question who or what after the verb to find the direct object. Tanya sent whom, or Tanya sent what? Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky with indirect objects in the sentence, because the indirect object usually comes before the direct object. So our first response on reading this sentence and saying Tanya sent whom or Tanya sent what might be to say Tanya sent Fievel, because that's what comes immediately after the verb. However, if we look at the meaning of the sentence, and that's really important that we look at the meaning of the sentence. If we look at the meaning of the sentence, Tanya did not send Fievel, right? Tanya actually sent a letter. So that is our direct object. Tanya sent what? Tanya sent a letter. Now, after we've got the subject, verb, and direct object together, we're going to ask the question to whom, for whom, to what, or for what after the direct object. And that will lead us to the indirect object. Tanya sent a letter to whom? Well, there is an answer to that question. Tanya sent a letter to Fievel. So that means that Fievel is our indirect object. Okay, so let's look at how to actually diagram the indirect object and add it to the diagrams that we've already been using. Here we've got the sentence diagram that we would have with a direct object, subject, verb, direct object, all on a horizontal line divided by the appropriate vertical lines. And then we're going to diagram the indirect object underneath the verb. So we're going to have this slanted line here coming out from underneath the verb. And then the indirect object is going to be diagrammed on a horizontal line coming off of that slanted line. And we do this because it's showing that the verb is done to or for this person. Now, if the indirect object happened to be in a prepositional phrase, like the video yesterday said could possibly happen, what you're going to do is you're simply going to put the preposition on this slanted line, just like we would if we were diagramming a prepositional phrase. You may have to go way back to that video on diagramming prepositional phrases to remember how to do that. But you will notice that it is the same kind of structure that we would have for a prepositional phrase, except if the indirect object doesn't have a preposition, we're just going to leave this space blank. And in the sentence we just looked at, there was no preposition, so we leave the space blank. So, in the sentence that we looked at, our subject was Tanya, so that would go there. Our verb was sent, so that would go there. Our direct object was a letter. She sent a letter, so that would go there. Then our indirect object was Fievel, so that would go there. All right, let's look at this with an example sentence and a diagram that shows us how we would diagram that sentence. Anakin gave Padme a kiss. All right, so we're going to start by looking for the verb. And we've got a pretty clear action word in this sentence, gave. So then we're going to ask the question, who gave? Well, Anakin gave. So that's our subject. Now, Anakin gave whom, or Anakin gave what? Well, Anakin did not give Padme. That doesn't really make any sense. We don't typically give people. So Anakin gave what? Anakin gave a kiss. So kiss is going to be our direct object. All right, then we'll ask the question, Anakin gave a kiss to whom, or to what? Anakin gave a kiss to whom has an answer. Anakin gave a kiss to Padme. So Padme is our indirect object. All right, so now that we've located those four parts of the sentence, let's go ahead and see how it would be diagrammed. So we've got our subject coming first, Anakin, and then we have that vertical line that cuts through the horizontal line, and we've got the verb gave. We ask the question, gave what after that? So we've got the vertical line that stops, and then we've got the direct object kiss. And then we've got the slanted line underneath the verb. And then off of that, we have the horizontal line with the indirect object, Padme. All right, so hopefully that all makes sense. Let's do another example that's pretty similar to that. All right, this sentence is a little bit longer, but the principle is still the same. So first, we're going to locate the verb. And we've got a clear action word here in taught. So then we're going to ask the question, who taught? Well, Luke taught. That's a pretty easy answer. Luke taught who, or Luke taught what? Well, this is a little bit tricky. Okay, because there is an answer to the question Luke taught whom? Luke taught Ray. However, the sentence doesn't end there. And so there is also an answer to the question Luke taught what? Luke taught the ways of the Force. So we have to think about, what does the sentence really mean here? What's really receiving the action? What did Luke teach? Well, Luke really taught the ways of the force. And so ways is going to be our direct object. And this is partly because Ray can answer the next question. Luke taught the ways of the force, to whom? Well, there is an answer to that, Ray. So we know then that Ray is the indirect object. So you have to think about these things when you're looking at these sentences. You have to look at the whole sentence and think about every part of it. And if one word can answer the indirect object question, that probably means it's the indirect object and not the direct object. You will see in this sentence that we can't flip it around and reverse it. We can't say Luke taught Ray to what or for what. The ways of the force doesn't really answer that, right? But Ray answers the indirect object question, so that means she's the indirect object and not the direct object. All right, so let's look at how this would get diagrammed. Very similar to our last diagram. Remember, with the direct object and indirect object, we're again looking for the simple direct object and the simple indirect object when we're diagramming. Not all the extra words, right? The simple one, usually one word, unless it's a proper noun that has more than one word that's part of the same thing. So we've got our subject Luke, vertical line cutting through, our verb taught, vertical line that stops, the direct object ways, and then of course underneath we've got the slanted line. Coming off of the slanted line, we've got a horizontal line that has our indirect object Ray. Okay, hopefully you guys are getting it. We're going to move on and we're going to add one slight element that you'll be pretty familiar with already. So let's talk about diagramming a compound indirect object. What if there are two indirect objects? You're pretty familiar with compound by now, and the structure is very similar. So once again, we've got this rocket ship-shaped structure, which we use to show two indirect objects. We really use it in a diagram to show two of anything. If something is compound, this is the structure that we use. So it's very similar, except that we've just got two indirect objects. We've got the subject in the same place, the verb in the same place, the direct object in the same place, and we've still got this slanted line coming down, but rather than one horizontal line coming off, we've got it splitting, and we've got the conjunction in the middle on the dotted line there. And then we've got the first indirect object and the second indirect object listed on horizontal lines. And remember, the first one is whichever one is listed first in the sentence, and the second one is whichever one is listed second. All right, so let's look at some practical examples of these. Here we've got the sentence, Darth Sidious sent Newt Gunray and Rune Hako a holographic message. All right, this may seem like a lot to start out with, but let's break it down. It's actually quite simple. So let's look for our verb, our action word. Pretty easy to find. We've only got one in the sentence, and that is sent. Then we're going to say who sent or what sent. There's an answer to who, Darth Sidious. So Darth Sidious is our subject. Now notice this is all the simple subject even though it's two words because that's a name. And sometimes names are more than one word, but it's still one person. So Darth Sidious is all one person. The same is going to be true later on. All right, so Darth Sidious sent whom or Darth Sidious sent what? Well, he didn't really send any people because it doesn't tell us where he would have sent them. So he sent what? He sent a holographic message. We are looking for the simple direct object, so message would be that because holographic is describing the message, what kind of message, all right? So Darth Sidious sent what? Darth Sidious sent a message. Darth Sidious sent a message to whom? We've got an answer to that question, and it's actually two answers, two characters, Newt Gunray and Rune Hako. Again, we're going to have both of these because these are both of their names, right? And we're going to have two words in each. So that's what it looks like. We've identified all the parts of the sentence that we're looking for. Let's see how it gets diagrammed. All right, so again, very similar. We've just got a split on the indirect object line. So we've got our subject, Darcidius. We've got that vertical line cutting through before the verb sent. We've got that vertical line that stops before the direct object message. Then, true to form, we've got this slanted line coming down from the verb. And then it splits off since we've got two indirect objects. And we've got indirect object number 1 comes first in the sentence, Newt Gunray, on the top line. And indirect object number 2, Rune Hako, comes second in the sentence on the bottom line. And then, of course, we've got our conjunction on the dotted line in the middle. All right, let's look at one more example with a compound indirect object, and then we'll get you guys practicing. Here's our last example. Darth Vader offered Lando and Lobot a deal they couldn't refuse. All right, so let's start by looking for the verb. We've got a clear action word here in offered. Who offered? Darth Vader offered. All right, so our subject is Darth Vader. Darth Vader offered whom, or Darth Vader offered what? Well, he didn't offer these people to someone else. What he offered was a deal. So, deal is the direct object. Now you notice we've got some words after the direct object, but we're not really concerned about those because we've identified the direct object. Just pay attention to the questions and find answers to the questions, and that will lead you to the words you're looking to diagram. Don't worry about the other words, just find the answers to the questions. So, Darth Vader offered a deal to whom? Well, we've got an answer to that question. We've got two people, Lando, that's one of our indirect objects, and Lobot, that's our other indirect object. All right, so the diagram is going to look like this. Darth Vader is our subject, vertical line cutting through, offered is our verb, vertical line that stops, deal is our direct object, and then, yep, we've got it here, the slanted line coming down. It splits off since we've got two indirect objects. We've got indirect object number 1, Lando, on the top line, indirect object number 2, Lobot, on the bottom line, and then we've got our conjunction and there on the dotted line in the middle. All right, guys, so hopefully you understand how to diagram indirect objects now. If you've got questions, be sure to contact me and I can try to clarify anything that may be confusing. Below this video, you're going to see several sentences to diagram. As always, you can submit those using the Let's Diagram website and uploading images of your diagrams, or you guys can take a picture or scan your paper and send it to me through the email or even submit it on Canvas. All right, guys, have a great day.